Hello, everybody. How's it going? Well, I decided today, I had gotten a couple people who follow me on Instagram. Thank you for following. If you haven't followed me, I am on Instagram under this name. But I do have a couple people that follow me on Instagram that watch the channel. I know I don't have many followers, but the people that do, I appreciate it. In any case, there was a couple people who said, "Oh yeah, I saw your video and your last video, and you had asked what we want to hear about and blah blah blah." So, one of them said, "Why don't you talk about when you were a teenager, some crazy stuff you did when you were a teenager?" I said, "Okay, that sounds like a good idea." Now, I wasn't wild by any means. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't do drugs. However, hang out with all the stoners. Those were my friends. I hung out with the class skippers. I hung out with the smokers. I hung out with the drinkers, the potheads, all of them. Those were my friends. I just chose not to do any of that. I was always so, what's the word I want to say? I lived in a very, 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 very small town. It's actually grown a lot recently. But when I went to school there, it was a very small town. So, I mean, we're talking, there was only 2 elementary schools because one on one side of town, one on the other, and 1 middle school, 1 high school. That's it. It was very small. Everybody knew everybody in town. Pretty much, if you lived in that town, you knew each other. That's just it. You knew of each other, or you went to school with somebody, It was very small. So there was always lots of people in town who knew my father and my stepmother. And so I was always afraid that if I did something, it was going to get back to them. Always afraid. And the thing is my father was very, I want to say he was more strict with me because I was the oldest, and I did live with him and my stepmother and my 2 stepsisters. Now, for people who don't really understand that whole half and step and all of that, basically what a step parent and a step sibling is my parents had gotten divorced, and my father remarried a woman, and she already had 3 children. 3 daughters. So what that means by step is I am only related to them through marriage. We have no blood relation at all. So I lived with my father and my stepmother and her 3 daughters, and so my father was very, because my mother had custody of my brother and my other sister. So, and my father had custody of me. And my father fought very hard to get custody of me. And so he was very, because I don't know if people are aware, but most of the time, guardianship gets given, well, you get mutual what do they call it? It's not mutual guardianship. It's, I forgot what they call it. Shared custody, I think it is. But usually the mother gets granted the children, unless she is deemed unfit or the children choose not to stay with her. Usually it goes to the mother. The kids usually always go right live with the mother, and then the father can fight for custody or shared custody or whatever. So, and back then, like nowadays, it's more common, you know what I mean? There's so many different ways custody can happen nowadays. But this was back in 87, 88, something like that. So it was very, very hard. It was such a different world back then for custody. And so my father fought very hard to get custody of me. And when he was granted it, he took it very seriously. And being, 12, 13, And then of course going through middle school and high school and whatever, I didn't really fully understand that. Now, I'm not going to say everything that, all of his decisions and all of that were right or whatever. I'm not defending. I'm just saying that I didn't understand why he did what he did to the level that he chose to do it, because I was a teenager. You know what I mean? He's not letting me do this. He's not letting me do that. I didn't understand it in the way that I understand it today. So yes, he was very, like my stepmother kind of took charge of her children, and then my father was very strict on me. He wanted me to get certain grade levels. He wanted me to do this. He wanted me to do that. And I think he just put a lot of pressure on me. And, as a teenager, I kind of resented that. But being an adult, I say, you know what? He was trying his best, and he wanted the best for me, and, whatever. So anyways, that kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent. But so I was always afraid, being in the small town, being that a lot of people knew my father, I was always afraid of it getting back to him. And if I ever did anything like that, if I ever smoked, if I ever drank, if I ever smoked pot, whatever it was, my father would have went through the roof. And the thing is, my parents were in this very huge custody thing. Like, my father had custody of me, but if my mother suspected any little thing, she would take him back to court. And so I always was in the middle of that. I was always in the middle of, well, don't do anything crazy, because, then your mother will think I'm unfit, and we'll go through this whole thing. And I was always aware of that too. So I probably had mega anxiety. I could tell you I had mega anxiety as a teenager. But back then, we didn't know what anxiety was. It was just me being a worrywart, or I don't know, they just didn't label it as anxiety. But I definitely did, because I had my mother on this side when I had visitation with her saying this. I had my father on this side when I lived with him. It was always constant, and then my stepmother always meddled in things, and it was like, oh my gosh, it was constant. So, to make a long story short, I didn't do any of that shit. I did none of that shit. And I'm not saying it's bad, and I'm saying it's good. I'm just saying I didn't do it. And my friends all did, and, they came into school high all the time, and they were funny, and this and that, but I never participated in any of that. So, going back to the question at hand, I did other things which is so funny that I say at the beginning of this, I was afraid of my father finding out of me doing drugs or drinking or any of that shit. But yet, I did other things. But here's the reason. I did them in other towns that I knew, yes, I could get caught. I could possibly get caught, and I think that was the high for me. But they were in other towns that I knew my father probably wouldn't have heard about it. You know what I mean? And yeah, if I got caught and the police were called or whatever, yes, he obviously would know. But the whole fun of it was, ooh, I might not get caught for this, or I could get caught for this, or will I get caught? And I think that was the high for me. So the big thing that I kind of did was I used to, and now this is the day before they had security cameras, before they had the little things on the little devices that would go off, set the alarms out. We didn't have any of that. People were trusted back in the 80s, or early 90s. So you could just walk out of a store, and unless somebody actually saw you doing it, you got away with it. So yes, I was a bit of a klepto. It started out innocently. Well, I guess not too innocently, but I wanted this necklace, and I kind of just said, what, I don't have the money. I'm just going to pocket it and see what happens. And I got away with it, and I was like, ooh, I could get this for free? Maybe I should do it again. And then it was kind of like, I'm not going to mention who was my partner in crime, but I had a partner in crime. And it became a thing where we would tally it up. We had this little book that we hid under our bed, and we just wrote everything that we got, how much it was, and it became like a oh my gosh, like, look at this, we have like an enterprise going, and then our friends would say, ooh, I saw this cute little shirt at such and such a store, do you think you could get it for me? And it was a challenge. Now, disclaimer, I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying that, anybody should go out and do that. No, you shouldn't. I wasn't right for doing it. And especially nowadays, no way. But I did do it. So that was my crazy thing. Then my accomplice and I came up with this little plan that, well, if you take something, one person could take it, then the other person can return it a little while later and get the money. Because you didn't have to fill anything out. You didn't need your license. You didn't need any of this stuff now that you need to return things. Probably because we were not the only ones coming up with this scheme. Because as they say, if you thought about it, somebody else has. So that kind of became the thing to do, was to, one person just steals something, the other person goes and returns it. Then because we didn't have shit to do. And I'm not saying stealing was the thing to do, but in the wintertime, there was no places to go. You know what I mean? We didn't have a car. Neither one of us had licenses. So our parents had to drop us off and pick us up, and they didn't want to go very far. So pretty much what we did was we went to the mall, and that was it. And it was a lame mall. It had a few stores in it or whatever. It wasn't very, wasn't like this mega mall with 3 floors. No, 1 floor and whatever. So we did it, and a lot of times we had no money. Like, we would have like $5 between us, and for a whole night, that was not a lot of money. So our big scheme was, well, if we steal something and we return it and we get the money, we'll have money for the evening. And it worked like a fucking charm, We started upping the ante too. Like, we started off with little things, and then we were like, oh my gosh, like, there was a JCPenney's in there, and up on the second floor, because the mall wasn't a second floor, but the JCPenney's had a second level. So up on the second level, they had the more expensive items, well, for that store. So they had a whole section of Hallmark ornaments, and those were like $25 a piece. And they were just a small box, you could pocket that easily. $25 for 2 teenagers for one evening back then was a lot of cash. So we did that for a little while. We had that gamut going on, and and sometimes we would just do it just to have extra money so we could buy what we wanted. Because yes, I worked a summer job, but that money only lasted for a little while, and then that was it. Our parents didn't give us money. If we didn't earn it, we didn't get it. That was our lesson. So a lot of times, like in the early spring before we could start working again, we didn't have any money, to go out and do anything. So, that was our answer, But I had to be careful, because if I had a new shirt or something and my dad knew I didn't have any money, he would question me. So we had to tell all of our friends, like, oh my God, I'm telling my dad that, you gave me this shirt, or I'm borrowing from you, or whatever. We always had to have everything in place. We were always, I gotta say, the one thing about us was we were always super, super organized about it. Like, we had all of our stories fucking straight. We had everything lined up. Our plan was always laid out before we even did it. And because that's me. I am still to this day very cut and dry with everything. I need to know how this is working, when it's going to happen. I like to have a general idea. I don't like to just say, okay, that's it. This is what it's. I don't work very well like that. I'm not very spontaneous. And anyone that knows my husband, he's the complete opposite. He is as spontaneous as they come. Me, I'm the complete opposite. I mean, I can deal with the spontaneity from time to time, but I definitely work on a different level. I have to have things laid out. I need to know what's going to happen this way. That's just how I've always been. And I just don't work on little notice. It works for me for, like, if I'm going to go out with him to make a delivery or something, but I still need as much notice as humanly possible. So anyways, back to that shit. So, it was me. I was always very detailed. Like, okay, so here's the plan. They've got the ornaments up on the second floor. The more expensive ones are towards the back. That was me. My wheels are always turning. I have to tell people, this is how it is, this is how it is, this is how it is, because otherwise, if I don't have things laid out in my mind, it's mass chaos. And I'm not always able to to grasp things on the fly. I'm not very good at that. Even if like my husband would be like, oh, well, say this is so and so and so, I have to know exactly what it is or I just fuck up. Like he wanted me to call into that show and kind of prank the guy, and it was on the fly, and I was like, and I fucked up, and he ended up hanging up on me. And see, my thing is I have to know exactly what I'm going into, and because otherwise on the fly it's just not my thing, But if I have things detailed, oh, I'm fucking amazing. I can just, and I am definitely a very good schemer. I'm good at scheming, but it has to be detailed and it has to be laid out, But and I mean, not so much anymore. I've kind of, I'm older now and whatever. But back in the day, I was a fucking schemer. Oh my God. My brother and I, when I lived with my brother, we could not sit in the same fucking room. We would tear each other to shreds. We were always arguing, always fighting. And then the only time we could get along is if we were fucking scheming against somebody else. And we were the biggest fucking schemers. Oh my God. We were always scheming somebody out of something. And so then when I hooked up with my partner in crime, and later on in years, the schemes were just at a different level, So yeah, that was probably the biggest thing I would say that I did that was on the edge or whatever. And to some that might not seem like very much, but for me, that was kind of a big deal. And I remember we stopped for a while because I was like, you know what, we got to cool down because we can't keep returning to the same stores. They're going to catch on to something. You know what I mean? We have to be careful. They're going to do their inventory. Things aren't going to match, and so we kind of cooled down for a little while. And I think my father was kind of on to something. So I said, you know what, we got to lay low. We got to just kind of, relax, recharge, give it some time and whatnot. So then it had been about maybe 6 months and we hadn't done anything. And that fire starts to burn in you again. It's like, ooh, I want to get that high again, I need that feeling. And okay, so let's just think of something, let's try something little.